Okay, so where did you volunteer at?
I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Central African Republic, which is a country about the size of Texas, just north of the equator, in the center of Africa.
Wow. So what made you decide to do that, to volunteer?
Well, that's a good question. I was a broadcast journalist, a TV reporter, and I grew up in Indiana, and I felt that being a journalist, I had to have a bigger picture of the world. And, I worked in central Indiana as a journalist, then in Florida. And I really wanted to get out there and see how the world is. And it's kind of hard just to go do that. And so I decided I have to find some kind of job that would take me out to where, real people live and I can see real issues and real health problems and real agricultural problems and kind of immerse myself in it. And it just kind of made sense that I joined the Peace Corps to do that because they would teach me the languages, they would get me there, give me a job. I could do good for the world, I could do good for myself. And, it seemed like a huge adventure just waiting for me.
Wow. So how old were you?
I was 28 when I joined and 30 when I got back. So a lot of people joined right out of college. In my group, most of them were right out of college, and several of them were in their 60s. And so I was older than the youngest and younger than the oldest, and I was kind of in the middle there. But I was in my late 20s when I decided to do it.
And was that hard for you to transition to having all the stuff here in America and going to Africa?
Yeah, especially since I worked in West Palm Beach, Florida, and Palm Beach County, which is a pretty wealthy area when I was the journalist down there. And I mean, Donald Trump has his big mansion down there, and there are more millionaires in that county than anywhere else in the U.S. And so my job took me out to meet a lot of them. And I don't get impressed by them, but I saw a lot of wealth, a lot of exorbitant wealth. And then I left that job and volunteered in the Peace Corps and went to where people had very, very little. They got by off less than $1 a day. And so it was quite a shock to go from one of the richest communities in America to one of the poorest on earth. But the one thing I found to be true was that even though the people in Central Africa, the people in my village, people that I met, although they had very little, they were a lot happier than the people that I worked with in Florida and the people I would interview there. It was just amazing how happy the people were because they had family, they had each other, they were lucky to have their health. They were glad when it rained because that meant they would have food for the next season. And we take a lot of things for granted, like running water, electricity, and they don't. If they had running water, they would be so happy. And they didn't have that, but they had each other, and they would pass their stories down from generation to generation. And to them, that was really priceless. And that, to me, was a priceless lesson to learn.
Wow. So, what exactly did you do there?
Well, I went over as a beekeeper, and that may sound a little crazy, but beekeeping in Central Africa is really important because you can do it with no money down. You can basically get a lot of sticks, put them together, and make a hive out of it and put it up in a tree, and bees will populate it, and bees will go out in search of pollen and nectar and make honey out of that and make wax. And then when they abscond, when they leave the hive, then you can go in and harvest it. And you can make a lot of money. You can make hundreds of dollars off of a hive because of the quality of wax and the honey that's there. So they sent me as a beekeeper, but my secondary job was to do video documentaries and radio programs for the Central African people. And for the World Bank and for the United Nations and places like that. And so I went over as a beekeeper. I ended up being a TV producer over there too, which was pretty cool.
And how long did you volunteer?
They ask you to do a 2-year stint in the Peace Corps. I was there just under 2 years. There was a lot of corruption in my country, and there were a lot of bad elements that moved in from other countries, and there were killings going on and attacks against Americans. And so a lot of the volunteers left prior to their 2-year commitment ending. And at the end, I felt that my personal safety was the most important thing for me, and it was getting very unsafe. And a Central African friend of mine, who I was working very closely with, was killed at that point because of the bandits. And I felt that the violence was getting too close to home for me, and I felt that it was best to end a little early. So I came home a few months earlier than my 2-year stint.
Oh, okay. So, last question. Do you have, like, any interesting story or, like, something that really impacted you over there? Overall that sticks out.
Go ahead.
Overall that, like, sticks out to you, like an experience.
There were hundreds of them, and I'm trying to think of one in particular. I could tell you one about life and death. I could tell you one about being stranded. I could tell you one about disease. I could tell you one, about perseverance. I guess the one that really stands out to me was of this man who knocked on my door one day and asked me how Americans had gone to the moon, because he couldn't imagine how we had done that. This is a man who had probably never been in a vehicle with a motor before in his life. He may have ridden a bicycle, but that was probably the fastest he's ever moved. And so the idea of going to the moon was just out of his realm of understanding. And so I tried to explain to him in the tribal language the best that I could how we could escape our atmosphere and take a rocket to the moon. And he was just amazed at that. And so I explained that the moon is up in outer space, and what outer space was, it's just this massive void, this emptiness that goes on, from our understanding, forever. And I didn't realize at the time that I was killing his version of God, because God, in his mind, lived right behind those cracks in the sky that he could see light through. And I explained that, those are distant suns, and we see them as stars, but they're just like our sun, they're very far away, and that they're not actually cracks in some wall where God lives. And I explained it very clinically and very technically, like they teach you in school what outer space is. And he went off, and he went home and told his family. And the next day he came back again to me, and he knocked on my door, and he was crying. And I said, "What is wrong?" And he said that God was dead. His God was dead. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because he doesn't live up behind those stars that I've always thought." And I realized that by telling him how we got to the moon, I had destroyed his whole understanding of religion. And so what I did was I took him up right to the wall of my house, and I got about this close to the wall of my house, and I said, "What do you see?" And he said, I can see my feet and a little bit of you and your wall, and that was it. I said, "Okay, now come back with me back to the mango tree." And we walked over there, and I said, "Now what do you see?" And he said, "Well, I can see the fields, and I can see the water pump, and I can see all the houses in the village, and over there I can see people, and I see some animals over there, and the pigs running around, and the chickens, and I can see everything." And I said, "Exactly, that's where God is. God's way, way out there in that emptiness that I told you about, so that he can see everybody equally. And if he were right up close, he would only be able to see maybe just you or the person next to you. So your God is not dead. He's just a little further out than you thought." And he went home and told his family, and they rejoiced and everything. But I realized how important it is to be careful when you're explaining something that's so highly technical to someone who's never never seen a photograph and never used electricity, and breaking his understanding of the world, I basically shattered it. But luckily I was able to bring him back to what he believed by explaining it how I just explained to you. And it made me really appreciative of my own education, but also of what they were teaching me. Because, you know, he has his beliefs, he really believes in them, and he had a very honest, logical question that he was really seeking an answer for. How did we get to the moon so far away? And by answering it, I realized that there's a real fine balance you need to walk when you're explaining very technical things to people that may not have, you know, the understanding that we do. So it was a very good lesson in cross-cultural sensitivity for me.
Okay, well, thank you so much for interviewing with me.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. Okay.